Welcome to the Foundations of Special Education and Individualized Education Plan, or IEP, implementation presentation. During this presentation, we will focus on the following essential questions. What fundamental information do I need to understand special education and IEPs? How can I use information contained in an IEP to support student success? And what are my role and responsibilities with regard to implementing a student's IEP? Throughout the presentation, we will also work in the context of the following agreements. All students are general education students first. All students start out in general education and become eligible for special education through a process of evaluation. It is only when Tier 1 and Tier 2 supports and interventions have been exhausted that a student may be referred for a special education case study. Special education is a service, not a place or entity. Special education has progressed a lot in the past few decades, and while we often refer to a student as being in special education, person-first language, such as saying that a student has a learning disability instead of a learning disabled student, or a student has special education services instead of a special ed student, is best practice and places increased focus on the individual, not the service that is being provided or the area of disability. The Special Education Department provides a variety of supports and services within and outside of the general education and should not be thought of as a self-contained environment. In addition to, not in place of, all students should always have access to Tier 1 supports and interventions. Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports and interventions should be put in place to support a student's academic, social, and behavioral success, in addition to those in Tier 1, not in place of Tier 1 supports and interventions. All members of a student's IEP team are working together and collaborating to support a student's academic, social, and behavioral success and to provide a free, appropriate public education. It is the responsibility of a student's IEP team, including general and special education teachers, to work together to support the student through thorough and appropriate implementation of the student's IEP. Failure of staff to coordinate services and effectively communicate regarding a student's progress can result in a failure to implement the IEP and a denial of FAPE, or free appropriate public education, as provided by IDEA, which can leave a school district vulnerable to legal action. An important distinction to make is that between a 504 plan and an IEP, or Individualized Education Plan. The following chart provides some discernment between a 504 plan and an IEP. Both provide protections to eligible individuals with disabilities. Students with IEPs require some form of specialized instruction or services to access their education. This could be a single class of special education like learning strategies, all classes in special education, or somewhere in between. Some students with IEPs require their education placement to be in a setting off campus. Students with 504 plans participate fully in general education with accommodations, assistive technology, and/or modifications. By law, an IEP must include a statement of a student's present level of performance, or how the student is currently performing in areas such as academics, behavior, social-emotional well-being, and health. Annual educational goals with objectives, special education supports and services that the school will provide to help a student reach their goals, modifications and accommodations the school will provide to help a student make progress toward their goals, accommodations the student will be allowed when taking standardized tests, how and when the school will measure the student's progress toward annual goals, and transition planning that prepares students 14.5 years or older for life after high school. There are 13 categories under which a student may qualify for special education services, including autism, deaf-blindness, deafness, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disability, speech-language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment. Each eligibility has unique determinant factors, exclusionary criteria, and inclusionary criteria that are discussed at an initial eligibility meeting or eligibility determination conference, EDC. The 5 most prevalent categories under which students receive special education services here at ETHS are specific learning disability, or SLD, other health impairment, or OHI, emotional disturbance, or ED, autism, and intellectual disability, or ID. If you would like to learn more about the eligibility categories or the factors considered in determining a specific eligibility, please visit the ISBE website. People often wonder how a student becomes eligible for special education services, and the answer is both prevention and intervention based. Once Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions have been implemented with fidelity and exhausted, and a student continues to lack academic, social, or behavioral success, the grade level SST 2-3 team meets. At this meeting, the grade level SST 2-3 team considers student needs and decides if the student requires a case study evaluation. If the team decides a student requires a case study evaluation, parental consent must be obtained for the evaluation to take place. Once the evaluation data has been gathered, the grade level team reviews the data and relevant eligibility criteria, determining if a student is eligible for special education services. There are a few good customer service guidelines to keep in mind when working with students with IEPs or with a student who you suspect may have a disability. When working with students who receive special education services, confidentiality is key. Always speak confidentially to students about their learning needs and supports. A student should never be identified as a student with an IEP or as receiving special education services in front of their peers. It is the responsibility of the teacher to offer and provide accommodations as outlined in the IEP. Please refrain from saying the student does not ask for their accommodations when discussing a student's performance or use of accommodations. It is not the student's burden to ask for what they are entitled to under their IEP. It is the obligation for the adults to provide. When communicating with guardians about a student who is striving to achieve success, share facts about the student's skills and functional performance in your class. Refrain from telling a family that their student needs special education. Instead, speak to your department chair and to the counselor about what you know about the student with a preventionist mindset and approach. The continuum of services. This graphic shows the continuum of services for students with IEPs. Once a student is found eligible for special education services, the IEP is developed, including services and placement. With regard to special education supports and services, all students must be serviced in the least restrictive environment, or LRE. According to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, the least restrictive environment means that a student who has a disability should have the opportunity to be educated with their non-disabled peers to the greatest extent possible. The least restrictive environment for a student is to have all classes in the general education environment with no supplementary aids or services. Students who have a special education class or classes, noted by a class code beginning with SE, are being serviced in the resource support or self-contained placement along the ISBE continuum of services. Previously, within the building, we referred to programs such as Resource, IP or Instructional Program, IPSC or Instructional Program Self-Contained, and the ARC or Adolescence Reaching Capabilities. Over the past few years, we have worked to remove program labels within our building, thus allowing increased focus on developing placement based on the individual student, not a program, and removing additional labels placed on a student who receives special education services. The next topic we will cover is the difference between modifications, accommodations, and differentiation. We'll support this with a visual in a moment, but a helpful way to think of these is that differentiation gives multiple methods through which to hit a target. Accommodations give students what they need to hit a target, and modifications change the target that students need to hit. This image offers a way to envision the difference between differentiation, accommodations, and modifications. Differentiation is aligned with MTSS in supporting the academic success of all students. It is allowing different ways of accessing the same target or objective by changing the material. Examples of differentiation include offering multiple reading levels and varying the level of questioning. Accommodations are methods put in place to give a student what they need to hit a target or objective, or to level the playing field. They can be physical or environmental changes, including extended time, scaffolding, frequent breaks, pre-teaching, use of graphic organizers, shortening the length of a test, changing test formats such as offering multiple choice instead of fill-in-the-blank response types, and allowing for verbal responses. Accommodations do alter the way tasks are presented, but do not alter what the student is expected to learn, the content of assignments, or what an assessment measures. Assignments and tests completed with accommodations should be graded the same way as those completed without accommodations. Modifications change the target or objective a student needs to hit or achieve. A modification does fundamentally alter the standard or expectation of a course or assessment. Curriculum and materials, such as assignments and assessments, may be adapted in ways such as being written at a lower level of understanding and simplifying vocabulary, concepts, and principles. Differentiation, accommodations, and modifications make learning accessible to students and are used to allow students to learn and show what they know without being impeded by their disability. Accommodations and modifications, as outlined in a student's IEP, are the responsibility of a teacher to provide and must be offered regardless of student request. The handout Possible Tier 1 Strategies was handed out on Institute Day 2 during the MTSS training and has a more exhaustive list of methods that may support not only students with special education services, but also those in general education. An IEP is not required to implement items on this list. When it comes to implementing accommodations and modifications, the concern often arises with regard to maintaining high expectations and rigorous curriculum while implementing the IEP with fidelity. Sometimes accommodations and modifications can be seen as lowering expectations or providing too much support for a student with a disability. The most important thing to focus on is that an IEP is an individualized education plan. This means that a student's specific strengths and needs have been considered, and a plan has been developed that will provide the student with the supports they need to achieve success and to minimize the impact of their disability on their opportunity to achieve success. Even when it comes to daily life, there are general instances where expectations are altered to support success. For example, law enforcement fitness tests, military fitness tests, and qualifying times for races such as marathons vary based on gender and/or age. In these situations, standards are not being lowered, but rather altered upon the consideration of certain factors. It may also help to remember that equality and equity are two different things. Equality is giving everyone the same thing, whereas equity is giving people what they need. So, how can a student's IEP at a glance help you support their academic, social, and behavioral success? This document should be available to you via TAC. It is typically uploaded by the student's case manager and includes information regarding student strengths and current academic, functional, social emotional, communication, and vocational performance. It includes students' annual goals and objectives and accommodations and/or modifications for both classroom and standardized testing. Your ability to immediately access this reference allows you to know which accommodations you need to provide as you are planning for instruction and assessment. If you are unsure how to provide a specific accommodation as it is written, please email or call the case manager for consultation. Together, you should be able to interpret and implement the accommodation. The student's case manager is listed on the first page of this document, as noted by the red arrow on the screen. Another source of consultation could be the previous year's content teacher in your discipline. The information contained in the goals and objectives sections of the IEP at a glance are related to a student's eligibility. For example, if a student has been found eligible for special education services under specific learning disability in the areas of reading and math, the student should also have academic goals in those areas. This information can support student success by giving staff insight into what the student is working to achieve, therefore areas in which they need the most assistance. All goals are written in alignment with Illinois learning standards and should be skill-based and measurable. The information located in the classroom accommodations and supplementary aids accommodations and modifications sections specify the accommodations and modifications that a student is afforded. Many are commonly utilized accommodations, but some may be written in vague language. This has a purpose, in that the accommodations need to be applied across contents and levels of curriculum. Writing the accommodation in more general terms allows the general education teacher and case manager to collaboratively determine the accommodation needed for the student to access instruction and demonstrate their learning. The information in these areas supports student success by outlining the specific structures that will level the playing field for students. These structures often benefit all students, not just those with an IEP, and many potential accommodations may be listed on the possible Tier 1 strategies. Should you have any questions about how to implement an accommodation, please reach out to the student's case manager directly for assistance. The present levels of performance sections of the IEP at a glance provide a brief summary of a student's strengths, academic, social, and functional, current academic performance including areas of strength and those that need improvement, and functional performance such as attendance, self-advocacy, and work completion. The information in these areas supports student success by giving staff a snapshot of the student. The information may contain above and below the line information, which help you better understand the student's abilities and challenges, as well as develop a relationship with the student. You can also see the student's grade level team members, including case manager, through the District Links tab shown here. Next, we will discuss Functional Behavior Assessment, or FBA, and Behavioral Intervention Plans, or BIPs. What are they? How do they help staff support a student's behavioral success? If a student who receives special education services is thought to demonstrate a behavior or behaviors that impede the student's learning or the learning of others, a functional behavior analysis, or FBA, may be completed. Functional behavior analysis is a process used to gather information about a student's behavior and will be used to determine the need for a behavior intervention plan, or BIP. The student is observed in one or more classes, often by the psychologist or other qualified person on the IEP team, in an attempt to determine antecedents, variables, and function as they relate to the target behavior, the behavior that is creating a disruption to learning. Members of a student's IEP team later convene to discuss the information gathered from the functional behavior analysis. Based on the information in the FBA, the team determines whether or not the student's behavior could be supported by a behavioral intervention plan, or BIP. A behavioral intervention plan supports implementation of replacement behaviors, those that are more positive than the target behavior, and increase access to the learning environment for the student and their peers. The BIP operationally defines the target behavior or describes what the behavior looks like and the potential function it serves. Your role in implementing the behavior intervention plan is important. Familiarize yourself with the plan and provide the interventions and reinforcers as they are listed. Your input as to how the plan is working or may need to be revised is also important to share with the case manager. Some common questions about teaming for students with IEPs include: who is on a student's IEP team? What does the partnership between case managers and general education teachers look like? And, as a general education teacher, what is my role on the IEP team? A student's team consists of several required members, including the student, guardian or guardians, case manager, counselor, and general education teacher or teachers, psychologist, IEP coordinator, dean, and related service providers, including but not limited to social worker, speech-language pathologist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, hearing itinerant, and vision specialist. The case manager's role is to monitor the implementation of a student's IEP and is the go-to for general education teachers. If you have a concern about a student with an IEP, you may choose to communicate with the case manager to get more information, such as if the behavior or academic challenges across classes, but you should also contact the family. While a case manager specializes in how to implement the IEP and may have more information about a student, as a student's classroom teacher, general education teachers should still establish rapport with the student and their family, and maintain communication to the extent necessary to support the student. The case manager may supplement a teacher's communication with the family, but should not be expected to consistently maintain communication for another teacher. With regard to the IEP, general education teachers have a responsibility to implement a student's plan and to attend IEP meetings as requested, or to submit feedback as requested if you have not been invited to the IEP meeting. Which general education teacher is invited to an IEP meeting depends on several factors, including free period availability, rapport with the student, student progress in a class, and student placement. While attempts are made to invite a variety of teachers from departments to IEP meetings, some teachers may be invited to more IEP meetings than others. If you are invited to an IEP meeting of any type, please request a substitute through ASOP as soon as possible. Types of meetings include domain meetings, which take place prior to an EDC and where current data is reviewed and determination is made as to what additional data, if any, needs to be gathered for evaluation. An Eligibility Determination Conference, or EDC. At this meeting, data is reviewed to determine either initial eligibility for a student who has undergone a case study or continuing eligibility for a student who currently receives special education services. An annual review meeting is the annual opportunity to discuss students' present levels of functioning, progress toward goals, use of accommodations, placement and services, and post-high school plans. Other types of meetings include a Manifestation Determination Review, or MDR, Progress Review, Information Sharing Meeting for the internal team only, and a 30-day review meeting. Regardless of the type of meeting you attend, a general education teacher should be prepared to share a student's rate of progress with regard to general education expectations, share a student's use of accommodations and provide feedback regarding their impact, and to make recommendations regarding course sequence and level. Other responsibilities of a general education teacher include gathering student performance information regarding IEP goals and skills, and reporting it to case managers when requested, such as at the end of each quarter. What do you and the special education teacher have in common? You both are responsible for supporting students with IEPs. You both need to communicate and collaborate around student access to learning. You both are responsible for understanding and implementing accommodations for students. You both must attend IEP meetings, and you both teach 5 classes and have a duty. Thanks to the feedback received from several departments, there are many actions that you and your special education colleagues take that meet the needs of students with IEPs. We want to lift those up here and share as exemplars of best practices. They include, when I have had students who were anxious about earned honors assessments in the past, the case manager and I have made arrangements for the students to take their written assessments in a smaller environment. I've talked to the case manager who helped me break lessons down into manageable chunks. I attend the IEP meetings I am invited to and learn so much about my student. I can also share about curricular and behavioral expectations for classes like mine to help the team decide on classes for the next year. And I try to work with learning strategies teachers on assignments, both due and missing, to help keep the students on track and to ensure student success. There are a number of resources you can access in order to obtain more information about a student who receives special education services. The most comprehensive information can be found in a student's file in South 121. Anyone who provides services to a student with an IEP may have access to the student's file. The file may contain a student's social developmental history, previous test scores, past IEPs, and potential information from previous schools. Reading a student's file in South 121 will help you create a more holistic picture of the student and increased understanding of the student as a person and as a learner. In addition to the student's file, there are a number of school-wide systems, people, internal and external, and technology and old school or paper resources that you can look to for assistance in supporting a student and appropriately implementing their IEP. Some final takeaways are that teachers should be partnering with a student's case manager to support a student. Teachers should also be providing accommodations as outlined in a student's IEP. Always offer a student their accommodation, not only when a student requests them. When providing an accommodation, provide the same condition for all students. For students without IEPs who demonstrate needs, implement interventions and be a preventionist first. Remember, collaboration is key. When in doubt, talk it out with a student's case manager. And thank you very much for your attention during this presentation.